I took the poison on a Tuesday. By Thursday, I was sealed in a cold stone crypt, finally free of Cedric's suffocating obsession. It was the perfect escape, until I woke up not in a getaway carriage, but naked, shivering, and chained to the Alpha King of the North's bed. People often romanticize the idea of being chosen by a powerful Lycan Alpha. The bards in the taverns of Oakhaven sing songs of fierce devotion, of monstrous men, brought to their knees by a single, fragile human mate. They sing of undying protection and lavish kingdoms. They never sing about the locks on the doors. They never sing about how protection quickly morphs into a prison. My name is Isolde Hastings, daughter of a minor impoverished baron, whose lands bordered the vast untamed territories of the Montgomery Pack. I was 19 when Lord Cedric Montgomery, the ruling Alpha of Oakhaven, saw me at a winter solstice tithe gathering. I was nothing special, just a girl in a mended wool dress, but Cedric claimed my scent drove him mad. Within a week, my father's debts were mysteriously forgiven, and I was taken to Oakhaven, keep traded like a prized mare to clear a family ledger. Cedric did not love me. He consumed me. His obsession was a living, breathing entity that choked the air out of every room I entered. He showered me with gifts I did not want, gowns of imported Myrish silk jewels, heavy enough to bruise my collarbones, and a personal guard of 4 scarred Lycan warriors who followed me even to the estate gardens. You are the heart of this keep, Isolde. Cedric would whisper, burying his face in my neck, inhaling my scent deeply enough to make my stomach turn. Without you, I am a beast. You ground me. But the beast was always there, lurking just beneath his charming, aristocratic veneer. Because Lycans have heightened senses, I could never hide anything from him. If my heart rate elevated in fear when he entered the room, he would demand to know who had frightened me, often punishing the servants for my internal anxiety. If I cried in secret, he could smell the salt of my tears hours later. I learned to hollow myself out to become a beautiful empty doll, because showing any genuine emotion only triggered his terrifying manic possessiveness. The breaking point arrived during the spring equinox. A young nobleman named Lord Henry Beaufort, a distant cousin of the royal line, visited Oakhaven to negotiate trade routes. During a banquet, Henry simply offered me a polite smile and handed me a dropped linen napkin. It was an innocent gesture, a human gesture. I smiled back. The next morning, Henry Beaufort's mutilated body was discovered at the edge of the Whispering Woods. Cedric stood before the visiting magistrates, his face a mask of solemn grief, claiming a rogue wolf must have breached the borders. But when Cedric returned to my chambers that night, I saw the dried blood caked beneath his fingernails. He cupped my cheek with those same blood-stained hands, his amber eyes flashing with a predatory, unhinged gleam. If I stayed, he wouldn't just destroy me. He would destroy anyone who ever dared to look at me. I needed to die. It was the only way Cedric would ever let me go. I turned to the only person in Oakhaven who existed outside the Alpha's immediate radar, Friar William, a blind, aging apothecary who tended to the local abbey and brewed tinctures for the keep. William despised the Lycan lords and their brutal reign over the human vassals. It took 2 weeks of careful whispered negotiations in the abbey gardens, slipping away from my guards for mere minutes under the guise of prayer. I traded my mother's heirloom ruby necklace, the only thing of value I owned, that Cedric hadn't given me, for a single corked glass vial. This is the draught of the weeping widow child. Friar William had whispered, his milky, unseeing eyes fixed somewhere past my shoulder, as he pressed the cold glass into my palm. It is distilled from the deathstalk root. Drink it, and within the hour your heart will slow to 1 beat per minute. Your skin will turn ice cold, your lips blue. To a lycan's ears your chest will be silent. You will be dead to the world for exactly 3 days. But be warned, Isolde, your mind will remain awake. You will feel the cold. You will hear the weeping. You will be a prisoner in a corpse. The plan was terrifyingly simple. I would take the potion during the upcoming autumn banquet. Cedric would mourn his ego, satisfied only by the tragedy of an unpredictable illness, rather than the insult of my desertion. They would lay me to rest in the Montgomery family crypt beneath the keep. On the 3rd night, William's trusted apprentice would break into the tomb, shatter the lock, and smuggle me onto a merchant ship bound for the southern continent, where lichen law held no jurisdiction. I hid the vial beneath the loose floorboard, under my vanity, waiting for the perfect moment. I spent my final days in Oakhaven, playing the perfect docile prize. I let Cedric hold me. I forced myself to smile at his possessive declarations. I was a ghost long before I ever unstoppered that vial. The night of the autumn banquet was loud, filled with the raucous laughter of Cedric's pack and the heavy, intoxicating smell of roasted meats and spiced wine. Dressed in a gown of midnight blue velvet that felt more like a shroud, I sat at Cedric's right hand. When the toasts began, I palmed the small glass vial. Under the cover of a raucous cheer, I emptied the bitter metallic-tasting liquid into my silver goblet. My hands didn't shake. I looked at Cedric, who was laughing at a crude joke, his sharp canines glinting in the candlelight, and I raised my cup. I drained it in one long swallow. The effects were almost immediate. A numbing cold started at the tips of my fingers and crawled up my arms, heavy as lead. The grand hall around me began to blur the roaring fire at the center of the room, fading into a distant, muted glow. I slumped forward. My goblet clattered loudly against the oak table, spilling remaining droplets of wine like dark blood across the white linen. Suddenly Cedric was there. His hands, usually so brutally firm, were shaking as he hauled me up by the shoulders. Isolde, Isolde. I wanted to speak, to gasp for air, but my lungs refused to expand. The paralysis was absolute. I was locked inside my own failing body. The last thing I felt before my vision faded entirely to black was Cedric pulling me against his chest, screaming for the pack healers, his agonizing, feral roar rattling the very stones of the keep. It worked, I thought, as the darkness swallowed me. I am free. True to Friar William's terrifying warning, my consciousness returned long before my mobility did. I awoke to absolute crushing darkness and the overwhelming scent of frankincense, damp earth, and decaying stone. I was lying on something hard and freezing cold, a marble slab. I couldn't move my fingers. I couldn't flutter my eyelids. But I could hear. I heard the heavy stone door of the crypt grinding shut, echoing with a finality that sent a spike of pure terror through my frozen mind. For what felt like an eternity, I lay there in the dark. The cold seeped through the thin silk burial gown they had dressed me in, biting deep into my bones. I counted the agonizingly slow beats of my own heart. 1. A long, agonizing stretch of silence. 2. I waited for the scraping sound of William's apprentice at the tomb door. Hours bled into days. I had no concept of time, only the maddening drip of water from the crypt ceiling and the occasional skittering of rats over the stone floor. Panic began to set in. What if the apprentice had been caught? What if Cedric had posted a guard? What if I was doomed to wake up fully in a sealed stone box, left to die of dehydration in the dark? Then I heard it. The heavy iron lock on the crypt door shattered with a deafening crack. Not the stealthy picking of a thief, but the brutal force of a hammer. The heavy stone hinges groaned in protest. Footsteps. But they were wrong. They weren't the hurried, light steps of a young apprentice. These footsteps were heavy-measured and utterly silent, save for the subtle crunch of leather boots on the gravel floor. A new scent flooded the stale air of the tomb. It hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't the earthy pine and blood scent of Cedric. This scent was overwhelming frost ozone, burning cedar, and an alpha pheromone so thick and ancient it commanded absolute submission. Even paralyzed, my dormant instincts screamed in sheer terror. "Well, little bird," a voice rumbled in the darkness. It was a voice carved from granite and velvet, terrifyingly calm and vibrating with power. "You certainly put on a convincing show." Heavy-gloved hands slid beneath my rigid body, lifting me off the marble slab as effortlessly as if I were made of straw. I was pressed against a broad, hard chest, wrapped in thick furs. The sheer heat radiating from the man was shocking against my freezing skin. I tried to scream. I tried to thrash. I remained completely immobile, trapped as this monstrous stranger carried me out of the crypt, out into the biting night air, and threw me over the saddle of a massive warhorse. The journey was a blur of wind, the rhythmic pounding of hooves, and the fading in and out of the potion's remnants. The paralysis began to break in agonizing, tingling waves. But every time I drifted toward wakefulness, exhaustion dragged me back under. When I finally opened my eyes, the world was a blur of rich reds and golds. I wasn't in the damp hold of a merchant ship, nor was I in a modest safe house. I was lying in a bed the size of a small room, cocooned in impossibly soft crimson silk sheets. A massive stone fireplace roared to my left, casting dancing shadows against tapestries depicting brutal lichen war scenes. I gasped, shooting upward, my lungs burning as they took their first real unrestricted breath in 3 days. But as I scrambled to throw off the furs and run, I was violently yanked back. A sharp metallic clink echoed through the room. I looked down in horror. Encircling my left wrist was a thick, padded iron cuff attached to a heavy chain that was bolted directly into the massive oak headboard of the bed. "I see the sleeping death has finally worn off." That same terrifying, gravelly voice echoed from the corner of the room. From the shadows of the bedchamber, a man stepped into the firelight. He was massive, dwarfing Cedric in both height and sheer breadth of shoulder. His hair was black as a raven's wing, and his eyes were a piercing, unearthly silver that seemed to strip me bare. I recognized the royal crest carved into the heavy iron pauldron on his shoulder. It was King Caelan Vane, the Alpha King of the Northern Territories, the ruler whom even Cedric in all his arrogant madness feared and bowed to. "What?" I stammered, my voice raspy and raw. I pulled at the chain, the iron biting into my wrist despite the padding. "Where am I? Why am I chained?" King Caelan walked toward the bed with the slow, deliberate grace of an apex predator circling trapped prey. He stopped at the edge of the mattress, looking down at me with an expression that was a terrifying mix of amusement and a dark, possessive hunger that made Cedric's obsession look like child's play. "You are in Winterbourne, Keep Isolde," Caelan said softly, reaching out. I flinched away, but his large hand easily captured my jaw, his thumb brushing over my pulse point, which was now hammering wildly against his skin. "And you are chained because you have a nasty habit of slipping away from men who claim you. Cedric is currently tearing his own territory apart, in grief believing the only thing he loved is rotting in a stone box." Caelan interrupted, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Friar William," the realization hit me like a bucket of ice water. The potion, the easy escape, the lack of guards. King Caelan's silver eyes flashed, and he leaned down until his lips were inches from my ear, his breath hot against my shivering skin. "You played a dangerous game, little bird. Did you really think an old blind apothecary could smuggle a rare deathstalk potion into a High Lord's keep without my network of spies, knowing I supplied the poison, Isolde? I let Cedric think he owned you, keeping you safe and warm in Oakhaven until you were desperate enough to walk right into my trap. You faked your death to escape a lord, only to deliver yourself directly into the bed of the king." My blood ran cold as Caelan's hand slid from my jaw down to the heavy iron chain, binding me to him, his fingers wrapping around the metal links like a promise. And unlike Cedric, he whispered, his eyes blazing, "I do not let my dead things go." The heavy iron chain clinked against the bedpost, a chilling soundtrack to the realization washing over me. I had orchestrated a masterpiece of deception, only to discover I was nothing more than a pawn on a much larger, far more dangerous board. King Caelan watched the color drain from my face. He didn't gloat with loud, boisterous laughter like the drunken lords in Cedric's hall. Instead, his satisfaction was quiet, radiating from him in waves of oppressive, suffocating power. "You look as though you've seen a ghost, Isolde," Caelan murmured, his heavy boots making no sound on the thick rugs as he stepped away from the bed. "Or perhaps you are just realizing that being a ghost does not excuse you from your earthly obligations." "You poisoned me," I rasped, my throat burning. "You used Friar William." "I provided an opportunity," the Alpha King corrected, smoothly pouring a goblet of dark spiced wine from a silver carafe. "Friar William believes he is a hero of the human resistance. He had no idea the smuggler he arranged for you was one of my own royal guards. It was a flawless extraction. Masterful, really. The lock on your crypt was forged by Alistair Munro, a master smith whose mechanisms are notoriously complex. My men had to shatter it entirely to get you out before the air ran thin." He walked back to the bed and held the goblet out to me. When I hesitated, he didn't force it. He simply set it on the nightstand, his silver eyes locking onto mine. "Why?" I demanded, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "I am the daughter of a penniless baron. Cedric only wanted me because I was weak, because I was a toy he could control. Why would the king of the Northern Territories risk a border war for a broken toy?" Caelan's expression darkened. The amusement vanished, replaced by a predatory sharpness that made the hairs on my arms stand up. He leaned down, placing one massive hand on either side of my trapped body, caging me against the headboard. "You are many things, Isolde, but you are not weak. And you are certainly no one's toy." He growled, the vibration of his voice humming in my chest. "Cedric Montgomery is a fool, a greedy, short-sighted fool who thought he could hoard a treasure without the crown noticing." He reached out his leather-clad fingers, brushing a stray lock of hair away from my face. "Your mother was Evelyn Crawford," Caelan stated. "It wasn't a question." I blinked, confused by the sudden mention of my mother, who had died of a winter fever when I was a child. "Yes, but she was just a seamstress before she married my father. Evelyn Crawford was the last living descendant of the Ardent line." Caelan corrected, his eyes flashing with a reverence that terrified me. "A human bloodline that carries a dormant genetic anomaly. When mated with an alpha, an ardent female does not just bear heirs, she bears kings. She passes on an immunity to silver, a heightened healing factor, and a lethal strength that rivals the oldest lichen gods." The room seemed to spin. "That's a myth, a tavern story." "It is history," Caelan said softly. Cedric discovered your lineage through an old census text. He didn't want you because your scent grounded him. He wanted you because you were his ticket to usurping my throne. He kept you locked in Oakhaven, terrified, hollowed out, ensuring you would never be strong enough to challenge him, but perfectly preserved to breed his untouchable army. Nausea clawed at my throat. All those times Cedric had wept into my neck, claiming he couldn't live without me. All the isolating protection. It wasn't love. It wasn't even obsession. It was a calculated, cold-blooded breeding program. He had murdered Henry Beaufort, not out of jealous rage, but out of fear that someone else would discover his prize. And you! I spat, a sudden, unfamiliar fire igniting in my veins. Are you any different? You stole me from a crypt. You chained me to a bed. You are just a larger, more powerful monster looking for a broodmare. For a terrifying second, Kaelin's eyes flared red, the beast beneath his skin surging at my disrespect. But then, impossibly, he threw his head back and laughed. It was a rich, dark sound that echoed off the stone walls. He reached into his fur-lined cloak and pulled out a heavy iron key. Without a word of warning, he inserted it into the padded cuff on my wrist. With a sharp click, the lock disengaged. The heavy chain fell away, hitting the floor with a deafening thud. I rubbed my bruised wrist, staring at him in shock. I chained you because you woke up terrified and prone to bolting, Kaelin said, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. But I do not keep pets, Isolde. I need a queen. A mate who is cunning enough to poison herself to escape a tyrant, and brave enough to insult the Alpha King to his face while wearing his chains. He stepped back, gesturing to the heavy oak door of the bedchamber. The door is unlocked. The keep is guarded. Yes, but if you truly wish to run into the frozen wastelands of the north, I will not stop you. You will freeze before you reach the border. Or you can stay. You can learn the power of the blood in your veins. You can stand at my side, and together we can watch Cedric Montgomery burn for what he did to you. He was offering me a choice, but it was a choice between the freezing void and the inferno. I looked at the heavy door. I thought of the damp, terrifying darkness of the crypt and the suffocating, cloying perfume of Cedric's chambers. Then I looked at the Alpha King, a monster who had manipulated my death, yet was the first man to ever tell me I was strong. I didn't run. I stood up on legs that were shaking, the crimson silk sheets pooling around my waist. I met Kaelin Vane's silver eyes, and I chose the inferno. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but Winterbourne Keep proved to be a forge rather than a prison. I traded my fragile Myrish silks for thick leathers and a cloak lined with black wolf fur, the unmistakable mark of the king's chosen. I sat beside King Kaelin in his war councils. Where Cedric had demanded my hollow emotions, Kaelin demanded my intellect, forcing his reluctant generals to speak their strategies aloud to me. Slowly the terror faded, replaced by an intoxicating magnetic pull. When Kaelin touched me, it wasn't to possess a fragile bird. It was to ground his own immense power in a true equal. 6 weeks after my death, the peace shattered. A bloodied scout rode into the courtyard, collapsing on the icy stones. Lord Cedric has found the shattered tomb, Your Grace. The scout gasped. He claims a rival Alpha stole his mate from the afterlife. He has conscripted every wolf and human in the south. He is marching on the northern border. A hushed murmur rippled through the generals. A lower lord marching an army against the king was high treason. I looked at Kaelin. His face was a mask of cold indifference, but a lethal gleam of triumph danced in his silver eyes. This was his grand design. He had left the shattered lock, intentionally knowing Cedric's unchecked arrogance would demand retribution. He had manipulated Cedric into breaking the most sacred law of the Lycan hierarchy, providing the crown with the legal justification to execute the Montgomery line and absorb the wealthy southern territories. That night, I cornered Calen in his war room, slamming my hands onto the massive oak map table. "You planned this from the moment you slipped that vial to Friar William," I accused, my voice shaking with awe and anger. "You wanted Cedric to march." Calen didn't flinch. "A king must secure his borders, Isolde. Cedric was a rot in the south. I merely sped up the infection so I could amputate the limb." "And what happens to me now?" I challenged. "Am I paraded on the battlements to break his spirit before you take his head?" Calen stepped into my space, his large hands gripping my waist, lifting me onto the edge of the table. "No," he murmured, his thumbs tracing my hips. "You are no longer a piece on the board. You are a player. The choice of how we end Cedric Montgomery belongs entirely to you." 2 days later, Cedric's chaotic, disorganized army arrived at the gates of Winterbourne. Cedric stood at the forefront in the snow, looking dreadful. His golden hair was matted, his aristocratic face hollowed by madness. "Calen!" He roared, his magically amplified voice echoing against the frozen mountain. "Send out my mate, or I will tear this keep down stone by stone." Standing on the high battlements, Calen's voice rolled over the valley like thunder. "You claim I stole your mate, Lord Montgomery. Let us see if the dead agree." The heavy iron portcullis groaned open. I walked out alone, stepping onto the snow-covered drawbridge. I wasn't wearing a burial shroud. I wore the black furs and iron-scaled corset of the Northern Queen. My chin was held high, my blood pumping with an intoxicating rush of absolute power. Cedric froze. "Isolde," he whispered, falling to his knees. "Isolde, you're alive. The goddess preserved you. Come to me. I will forgive this trespass." He reached out a trembling hand. I looked down at the man who had turned my life into a waking nightmare, seeing only a pathetic, greedy tyrant who had mistaken control for strength. "I am not your mate, Cedric." My voice rang out clear and steady. "And I am not going back." Cedric's face contorted. "He has bewitched you. He forced you. I poisoned myself to escape you." I screamed, the words tearing from my throat, releasing a year of pent-up terror. I drank the weeping widow. I lay in a stone crypt in the dark, praying for death because a cold grave was infinitely better than spending another second suffocating under your obsession. A collective gasp rippled through Cedric's army. To be rejected so utterly, so publicly, was the ultimate disgrace. Cedric's grief twisted instantly into a feral, blinding rage. Bone-snapping, he forced a shift in broad daylight. A massive, golden-furred beast roared at the heavens and charged the drawbridge. He didn't make it halfway. King Calen dropped from the battlement's landing with a ground-shaking thud. He did not bother to shift. He caught Cedric's massive, snapping jaws with his bare, armored hands. The fight was brutal fast and entirely one-sided. With a sickening crunch, Calen twisted Cedric's neck, dropping the lifeless golden wolf onto the blood-stained snow. Silence fell over the valley as the Oakhaven army dropped their weapons, baring their throats in total submission to the Northern King. Calen turned to me, his armor splattered with the blood of my former captor. He walked toward me, his silver eyes blazing with that same terrifying, possessive hunger. But this time I didn't flinch. He dropped to one knee on the drawbridge, bowing his head, offering me his absolute devotion in front of thousands. I had faked my death to escape a cage, only to wake up in another. But as I placed my hand on Calen's armored shoulder, I realized the truth. A cage isn't a cage if you hold the key. And the King of the North had just handed me the keys to his entire kingdom. If you survived this twisted tale of betrayal, Alpha Kings, and taking back control, don't leave me hanging in the cold. Smash that like button to show your support. Share this story with your fellow dark romance lovers, and subscribe to the channel for more immersive, heart-pounding werewolf dramas. Ring that notification bell so you never miss a twist, and let me know in the comments, would you have made the same deal with the Alpha King? See you in the next chapter.